Hi, I'm John Stevenson. We're going to be talking about the Roman Empire in the first century in our continuing study of the history of civilization. We left off with Octavius, also known by his title Augustus. Augustus becomes the first emperor of Rome, accepted by Rome. Remember, his adopted father Julius Caesar had been put to death. It's under Augustus that we have the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. And it's also during this time that Jesus is born, although Augustus probably never heard of him. After all, Augustus has already died by the time the ministry of Jesus begins. The quote that we attributed to Augustus, "I found Rome brick, I left her marble," shows the prosperity that Augustus brought to Rome. We also have during this time the Roman imperial cult, beginning with Augustus. He is given titles like Divi Filius. In Latin and Greek you say Huios to Theo. They both mean the Son of God. And as such, there are temples. For example, there's one in Asia Minor that's raised to him. And the Prian inscription, which states the birthday of the god Augustus was the beginning of glad tidings. Now, the way you say that word in Greek, euangelion, that's the word we usually translate the gospel for the world. And so these things that are said of Augustus, we see in the New Testament attributed, they're spoken of, describing Jesus. Edward Gibbons, in his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, says of the state of religion in this era, the various modes of worship which prevailed in the Roman world were all considered by the people as equally true, by the philosopher as equally false, by the magistrate as equally useful. And thus toleration produced not only mutual indulgence, but even religious concord. And that was true, and it's going to be true until we see the rise of Christianity. And then we're going to see a great intolerance that will be directed against followers of Jesus Christ. Now, Tiberius comes after Augustus. He had been adopted by Octavius, and because actually he wasn't the first choice. He was the second or third choice, but the other choices had died off, and so Octavius chooses Tiberius to be his first of all his regent, and as Augustus is getting older, Tiberius is sort of picking up the reins of command. It's not a job he really wants. It's not that he's ambitious for this. He's chosen for this, and indeed he's told to divorce his wife and marry a new wife that will sort of connect him to Octavius. And he doesn't seem to be all that happy about that. And then once Octavius dies, now he becomes the emperor. Of course, the crucifixion of Jesus is during his reign. But again, that probably did not come to his attention. That was an out-of-the-way event that happened on the fringe of the empire. He probably never even heard of Jesus. Toward the end of his life, he retires to Capri in southern Italy. And really it's a sign that he doesn't really want too much to do with the running of the Roman Empire. And yet he becomes very suspicious, very cruel. Indeed, you can get imprisoned just for saying the wrong thing toward the end of his reign. Now we move from Octavius to Tiberius, but then when Tiberius dies, he doesn't have any children. And so the next one to become emperor will become one of his nephews, Caligula, and Caligula is going to be the new emperor. Now, Caligula starts off, he had been friends with Herod Agrippa the First, remember there's a later Agrippa the Second, but Agrippa had been, and there's a number of people named Agrippa, but Herod Agrippa had been the grandson of Herod the Great, Jewish, and yet had become friends with Caligula. Now, just the name Caligula I had to talk about. Caligula, it's a nickname, but it caught on. Means little boots, because he had grown up in military families, and he had been taken out on campaign, and they had dressed him up in a little soldier's uniform with little shield and a little sword and little boots. And so that became his nickname. Well, Herod Agrippa had become friends with him, and they were out one day writing this before he had become emperor, while Tiberius was still alive. And Agrippa sort of made the offhanded comment, you know, if your uncle died, you'd be a great emperor. You'd really just do such a terrific job. And word got back to Tiberius. Remember I said that you could be imprisoned for saying the wrong thing. And that was the wrong thing to say. And Herod Agrippa was cast into chains into a Roman prison because of his comments. Well, once Tiberius dies, Caligula now is acclaimed the new emperor, and the first thing that he does is he has Herod Agrippa brought out from prison, and he says, take those chains off him, weigh those chains, and give him that weight in gold. And so Herod Agrippa is going to be a close friend of the emperor Caligula. So Tiberius dies, and Caligula becomes the new emperor, and at first it looks like, well, he might not do too bad of a job. And then 6 months into his reign, he becomes very ill. He comes out of it, but he just seems to be completely insane. Not that he was a nice person going into this, but coming out of it, his cruelty and there's no nice way to say it, his insanity is unmatched. He puts his horse up to be consul. Remember, instead of having a president, they'd have two consuls. So President Horus, and he leads his army all the way to the English Channel, to the ocean. And when they get there, okay, who are we going to conquer? He says, go out and collect some seashells. Seashells? Yes, collect seashells. We've taken captives in our campaign. And then he turns around and marches back to Rome. What's that all about? And he gives orders for a statue of himself to be erected in the Holy of Holies in the temple in Jerusalem. Now, that's just going to cause all sorts of trouble. And he sends orders to the governor of Syria, go down and put a statue of me in Jerusalem's temple. After all, they don't have an idol in that temple. They're missing a god. I'll be their god. And the governor of Syria writes back and says, "Oh, please reconsider. Don't do this. You're going to create a huge rebellion. They will not accept that." And meanwhile, Herod Agrippa the First, remember his friend, comes to Rome and approaches Caligula and says, "Please, you need to reconsider this. You cannot force the Jews to accept a idol inside their temple." And so Caligula says, "Okay, I'll reconsider. We won't do that. I'll rescind my order. However, that Syrian governor, Petros was his name, who didn't immediately jump and put that idol in when I told him to, I want him to put to death for disobeying me." Unfortunately, Caligula is assassinated before that order could be carried out. So that governor does manage to survive, and Caligula's reign is cut short after only about 3 years or so. So now we move from Caligula. He's too young to have any children. Not too young, but he doesn't have any children. And so who's going to be the new emperor? He's just been assassinated, and they've run out of people. And the soldiers are running around the palace. Who can we find? And they see some feet sticking out from behind a drape, and it's old Claudius, the uncle of Caligula, and they bring him out. Now, to get the point of Claudius now becoming emperor, you have to hear the description of Claudius by Suetonius. Suetonius is later Roman historian. He describes Claudius as having an uncontrolled laugh, a horrible habit under the stress of anger of slobbering at the mouth and running at the nose, a stammer, and a persistent nervous tic of the head, which was apparent at all times, but especially when he exerted himself to the slightest extent. And so Claudius was someone who Octavius has said, I don't really want to have him run. It's not that he's a pretty smart fellow, but sometimes he doesn't make sense, and then sometimes he looks so weird, and let's just have him sort of out of sight, out of mind. But Caligula had brought him back because Caligula enjoyed making fun of him, and yet this outward demeanor concealed an inward attitude where inward. Claudius was a fairly smart person, in spite of how he looked, in spite of how he appeared. And so Claudius now is going to become emperor. One of the things he does as emperor is he extends Roman citizenship to those provincials who were in positions of authority. Now, not everybody in the province is going to get citizenship. That's only for special people, but it is for those who hold high positions of authority. And remember, the point is made in the New Testament that the Apostle Paul had been born into citizenship. That was a very high privilege. Other people had come to it very difficultly, with great difficulty, perhaps even purchasing or paying a high price or something. And yet now Paul had been a Roman citizen and had that right of citizenship. Well, he also makes it illegal, and this is along the same lines. Claudius makes it illegal for foreigners to adopt names of Roman families. And when we mention the Apostle Paul, that's not his first name. That's a family name. Paulus is a family name, as seen when we see Luke, as he's writing the book of Acts, uses that, and he makes mention of Saul, who was also known as Paul, when Paul first comes into contact with Sergius Paulus, who's the proconsul of Cyprus. We also see under Claudius he expels the Jews from Italy. And again, the New Testament makes mention of this, as well as historical writings. And it's because of that when Paul is in Corinth, he finds himself joined by this Jewish couple, Aquila and Priscilla, who had been tossed out of Italy by the edict of Claudius. Now, Claudius seems to do okay, except that he had a very ambitious wife. He had a first wife, Messalina, who was just very was no nice to put it. No nice way to put it. She was very unfaithful to him, and finally she went out and even though she was still married to him, she married one of the consuls. And that was, you didn't do that. You didn't have two wives any more than we do here in the United States. And so he had her put to death, and then he took on a new wife. And this new wife had already had a young son, and she wanted her son to be the new emperor, and so she poisoned him. And she fed him. He used to enjoy eating mushrooms, and she fed him mushrooms that were laced with poison, and he started to get sick and doubled over, but he wasn't dying. And so she said, "Here, let me help you. Here, if you throw up, then you'll feel better." And she took a feather, dipped it into the poison, and then put it down his throat to poison him even faster. And now he finally died. And so Claudius now has died, and that leaves his stepson, through Agrippina, who he had taken as a new wife. That's going to put Nero on the throne. And so we come to Nero. And Nero becomes emperor in 54 AD. Now, Nero was a fairly young fellow at this point. He was not much to look at. He was sort of short and fat, and had been educated in Greece. In fact, he was very enamored with Greek culture, with Greek athleticism. Remember, the Romans, they would go and attend maybe an athletic game, but they would be a spectator there. A highborn Roman would not participate in the games. That was only for the lower class or for the slave. Not Nero. Nero wanted to be an actor. He wanted to be an athlete. Didn't really have the body of an athlete, but he wanted to be one nevertheless. And so he participates in the Olympic Games, and he says, we need to add a new game to the Olympic Games. We need to, because after all, he's not much running or jumping or anything like that. But But he says, let's add chariot racing to the Olympic Games. And sure enough, chariot racing was brought into the Olympic Games, and Nero fancied himself as something of a charioteer, and so he competed, and the race started, and after the first turn or so, Nero falls out of his chariot. And all the other charioteers pull their chariots to a stop, and they wait until he gets back in his chariot, and then continue so that he can win. Because they're not going to offend the emperor by winning against him, and so they're holding themselves in check so that he can win the game, and then he can have his accolades and not take it out on them. In the year 64, there's a great fire in the city of Rome. We quoted Octavius, who had said, "I found Rome brick and left her marble," but truthfully, a lot of Rome was still made of wood. And so there was this great fire in Rome, and word got out that Nero had been seen in his villa looking at the fire from afar and playing his lyre, composing a song about the burning of Troy. And people began to wonder, was he responsible for the fire? Had he set the fire? I'm not sure that he had. I don't think that's necessarily the case. But he was entering a public relations nightmare, and so he needs somebody to blame, and he chooses the Christians to blame for the fire. And so now he begins a intense persecution of the Christians. This is the first time that the Romans had, I think maybe they'd taken notice of the Christians by now, but now this is the first persecution, and it's going to be the first of a whole line of persecutions against the Christians. Now, toward the end of Nero's reign, there are rebellions because of his mismanagement in Gaul, in Spain, and especially in Judea, where he had sent various procurators and tax gatherers to just fleece the people, because Nero was just spending. His spending was out of control, and so always needed more taxes and raising them in all sorts of outrageous ways, and this led to a rebellion. And finally, Nero commits suicide because he can see the handwriting on the wall. He can see that he's going to be overthrown. Rather than wait to be assassinated, he kills himself. And as he bleeds out, he says, "Oh, what a great actor the world has lost." And so he commits suicide. Now, I said there were rebellions in a number of places. The one I want to look at is the rebellion in Judea, where the revolt breaks out in the year 66, and the 12th Legion from Syria is sent down to put down this revolt, and they're turned back and then ambushed, and the entire 12th Legion is defeated. They lose their standard, their eagle, and it's a tremendous defeat. And the Jews look at this and they say, "We have won against the Romans. We are victorious. We are free." And they are celebrating. And now Vespasian, a very competent general this time. I'm not saying that the previous general was necessarily incompetent, but Vespasian, he's sent now against Judea to put down this revolt with not one, but with 3 legions, and he's going to get a 4th from Egypt. He'll send his son down to Egypt, his son Titus, also a very good general in his own right. And Vespasian lands in Galilee first, and he spends a year conquering and bringing Galilee under submission. In fact, it's said that the Sea of Galilee becomes red with the blood of Jews that are being put to death. And one of the Jewish generals that is not killed but is captured at this time is a general by the name of Josephus. And Josephus is going to be an eyewitness to the events and actually writes about them. And so we have a first-hand account of a great many of events that take place in this Jewish revolt. And Nero has died, and another emperor has taken his place, and that fellow lasts for about 3 months, and then he is overcome by another emperor. And the year 69 is known as the year of the 4 emperors, where one after another, and finally Vespasian, his own troops say, "Well, you'd make a better emperor than all those guys who keep knocking each other off." And he says, "You're right. And so he takes that title of emperor, leaves his son in charge of completing the mission to put down this revolt in first Galilee and Samaria and then Judea, leaves his son Titus in charge, and he sets sail for Rome, where he's going to become now the emperor of Rome. Meanwhile, Titus comes down to Jerusalem, and he comes to Jerusalem in January of 70 A.D., and Titus surrounds the entire city, lays siege to the city of Jerusalem, builds a wall around the entire city so that no one can come in and no one can go out. And that would have been okay for the Jews because they had lots of supplies gathered up. But there were different groups of Jewish people inside the city fighting each other. And in the fighting, somebody threw a match or a torch or something into the grain storage area, and all that went up in smoke. And so now Jerusalem, that had been packed with people because they had all gathered for a Jewish celebration earlier, now it was packed with people, and they were surrounded. And a wall went up around the walls of Jerusalem, an outside wall. Anyone caught trying to flee the city was taken and crucified, so that Jerusalem was regularly surrounded by crosses and people being put to death. The city finally fell in that August, that summer of 70 A.D., as Titus and his soldiers broke through the various walls, finally broke through this Antonia fortress that you see up here on the right-hand side, and then made their way to the temple. That was the last part of the city to fall. And they set fire to the temple and burned it to the ground, and then built an altar and gave sacrifices to the pagan gods of Rome, thus rendering a place that was now desolate, setting up an abomination of desolation on the site of the temple. As the temple is being destroyed, and in fact the temple was so thoroughly destroyed that archaeologists and scholars argue today about exactly where it was located, and I think we have a pretty good idea, but it's a pretty good idea based upon some suppositions, and nothing remains of the original temple. All that remains are some of the outside walls of the Temple Mount. That's what you're seeing here in this lower picture. The Christians had remembered the words of Jesus, Luke chapter 21, verse 20, where Jesus said, "When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is at hand." And they had seen that 12th legion come down, and we're told by Jewish historians like Eusebius that the Christians had all left town. They had left the country and had escaped to the east. And so now Jerusalem falls. We have a Roman coin minted during this period, which is very striking. It depicts Israel as though she's a woman who has been vanquished by the conqueror standing behind her. And of course the inscription says Judea capta. Judea has been captured. And the picture of Israel as a woman, or Jerusalem as a woman, is striking, given that image that we see in the book of Revelation chapters 17 and 18, where this city, mysteriously called Babylon, the great city, is pictured as a woman who has been vanquished by the dragon that she tried to ride. And it's a striking picture of Jerusalem and its fall and its conquest. Titus is going to be our new emperor after the death of Vespasian. Vespasian reigns quite a few years, and then Titus now will be returning to Rome after the fall of Jerusalem. He actually has a girlfriend, Bernice, the daughter of Herod Agrippa I, and he's very taken with her, although she's quite a bit older than he is. He wants to marry her, and his father and the Roman Senate won't have any of that. They remember Cleopatra. That was a problem sort of situation, and so at their insistence, Bernice is sent away from Titus, and he's sort of sorry to see him go. Titus is a very popular general and will be a popular emperor once he becomes emperor. There is, overlooking the Colosseum, there is and I'll talk about the Colosseum in just a minute, the Arch of Titus, the Victory Arch, to celebrate his conquest of Jerusalem. When you come under the arch, on the inside of the arch, there's this graphic picture of the loot that has been gathered from Jerusalem and from the temple, and there's a depiction of the lampstand, the 7-branched lampstand that was taken from the temple. It's the only accurate depiction that we have, and of course there's other things being taken, not the Ark of the Covenant, that had already been lost, but other items from the tabernacle. On the other side of the arch, there is a representation of Titus himself. He's riding a chariot with these wonderful white horses as he comes in victory, marching into the city with all the riches of the temple and of Jerusalem. Now, those riches are going to be used to build this great Colosseum. It's called the Colosseum not because it's so big, and it is big to be sure, but it's given that name because there had been on this site previously a great statue of Nero. Well, that statue is removed, that great colossal statue, and now we have the Colosseum, given the same name, where there's going to be gladiatorial games, but this is all going to be built with money that had been taken from Jerusalem. In 79 AD, and this is when Titus now has become emperor, because Vespasian finally got old and he finally died. In fact, as he died, he made the comment, "I think I'm turning into a god," and that was sort of tongue-in-cheek, because oftentimes when the emperor would die, they'd say they'd pass a ordinance, they'd deify him. Well, that same year in 78, the mountain of Vesuvius in the background, it completely exploded. It was a volcanic mountain, and the entire top blew off and buried the twin cities of Pompeii, pictured here, and also the neighboring city of Herculaneum, buried them under both lava and ash. And one thing that did, it preserved these cities. They're in a remarkable state of preservation, so it's an archaeological delight as we have come in and found these cities almost completely intact. Titus, unfortunately, dies after just a few years, and his younger brother Domitian now becomes emperor. Domitian did not have the same popularity as Titus. So he's the younger brother of Titus. One of the laws that he passes is a circumcision tax, in which anyone who is circumcised, and really it's a law directed obviously against the Jewish people, anyone who is circumcised has to pay this tax. And as you might imagine, that's how are you going to tell if somebody's circumcised? Where are you going to go do inspections, and invasion of privacy, you might imagine. And there would be situations where somebody might be accused of being Jewish or having been circumcised, and they would be taken and unclothed to just do a spot check. Do you have to pay these taxes or not? He also institutes a persecution of the Christians. Vespasian and Titus didn't seem to be that concerned with Christians, but Domitian does. Tradition has it that the Apostle John is exiled during this period. Now, that might have happened earlier. We're not entirely sure. But there is reputed to be a persecution, at least for a time, under Domitian. And the early church historian Eusebius tells us that he also arrests and questions the grandchildren of Jude. Remember, the half-brother of Jesus, the one who wrote the epistle of Jude in the New Testament. He arrests Jude's grandchildren because, after all, they are descendants of David, and he wants to see if there's any hint of a rebellion among the Jews wanting to put descendants of David back on the throne. And they're questioned, and he questions them and then releases them. He says, well, they're not any threat to us. At the end of his reign, he's going to be assassinated. And this is going to bring to a close our study of the first century, in that we have seen the Julian emperors, those related to Julius Caesar and Octavius, Augustus, and Tiberius, and others like that. And then we had the Flavian emperors, the emperors like Vespasian and Titus and Domitian. And now we're going to see a new group eventually, but we'll see these next time, the Antonine emperors. We had the birth of Christ, and we had the death of Christ during this time, and also the fall of Jerusalem. And these events all take place in this first century. In fact, the New Testament is written during this period. This is the background of the New Testament.